Daily style+home fighting+palace fighting, not cruel. In her past life, at the age of 18, Wanyue married Yin Qi, the fifth son of Emperor Kangxi, as her legitimate daughter and became the emperor's daughter. In law. After 35 years of marriage, Yin Qi had also favored her, but she was timid, afraid to take on the favor. She settled down in the backyard as a quail, thinking she could protect her own child well, but she didn't even protect her own child. Her eldest son died early, and her second child miscarried. In the end, she was depressed and passed away. Suddenly waking up, Wanyue was reborn on the day of her 18th wedding and became the side fortune of Yin Qi. Reviving life once again, Wanyue wants to change her destiny against the heavens. She wants to have all the rights, status, and love she needs, and she must take good care of herself and her children. After getting married, Yin Qi discovered that his family's side Wufujin had the ability to turn their hands over for the clouds and cover their hands for the rain. People rushing towards his mansion were all rushing towards his side Wufujin. Bien Wufujin has become a sweet cake, and his childhood is even more enjoyable than his. This strange sign had to alert him. Does his side Wufujin no longer love him? Suspend the Qing dynasty, set it up like this, and refuse to be scrutinized. Keywords of the novel. Wufujin Rebirth without a pop-up window. Download the complete TXT collection of Wufujin Rebirth, and read the latest chapters of Wufujin Rebirth. Chapter 1. Rebirth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Rebirth on the 5th day of the 12th month in the 11th year of the Yongjing reign. The heavy snow had been falling continuously for several days, and the legitimate mother of Prince Hshuahunka, Tara Wanqi, was lying weakly in bed. The scattered heavy snow pounced on the window, making a rustling sound. Wanyue looked at the sky outside through the window, her eyes a bit dizzy. She saw that the color was very dark that day. Although the wind was not strong, the cotton robe on her body seemed to have an ethereal feeling. The stove had run out of warmth, and her room was quiet. The two women who served her had long disappeared. Wanyue moved her body and prepared to stand up, her body soft and trembling all over. A crutch stood by the edge of the bed, and Wanyue walked slowly over, picked it up, and placed it on her wrinkled hands. The crutch was cold, and a chill came from the palm of her hand, giving Wanyue a feeling of holding the ice. Wanyue leaned on her cane and trembled as she approached the dressing table. She looked at herself in the mirror and chuckled twice in self-deprecation. The woman's hair in the mirror is already somewhat sparse, her oval-shaped face has become much thinner, and her face is covered in fine lines. The long and used rouge and powder on the dressing table had already bottomed out, and her eyes were momentarily moist. Wanyue knew that since her husband Yin Qi passed away a year ago, there has been no place for her in this mansion. In addition, Yin Qi's Yin Yang, her mother-in-law, and the beloved concubine of Emperor Kangxi, Yang, passed away 3 months ago. Since then, there has been no one to protect her anymore. These maids in the mansion have been bullying this old woman recklessly. Thinking of this, Wanyue's heart was filled with grief, and tears welled up. After calming down, I wiped away the tears on my face, spread a light layer of powder on my face, and then applied a thin layer of lipstick on my dry lips. Even in her old age, she still wanted to maintain the dignity of being the legitimate Wufujin. She wanted to take one last look at this royal mansion. She propped her hand on the edge of the dressing table and sat up, with a hint of warmth remaining on the stool. She shuddered, then used all her strength to grip her cane and walked out towards the door. The snow in the Wang mansion has not been cleared by the people yet, and the ground is still piled with snow. As soon as one steps on it, they sink half a foot deep. She walked slowly, took a few steps, and when she turned around, the path she had just taken became blurry again. She stood on crutches in the snow, looking at the bricks, tiles, and trees in the royal mansion with a pitiful gaze. Suddenly, her gaze turned and she saw a familiar figure walking down another corridor. His dazzling court uniform made him look particularly prominent. Among the children of Yin Qi, his second son Joro Hongjun looks the most like him, and it's no wonder he dotes on the side of Fujin Rebirth like that. Hongshu also inherited the title of prince and was conferred the title of Prince Hshuahunka by Emperor Yongzheng. Wanyue secretly sighed that Rebirth's life was better than hers. Yinan gave birth to 4 sons and a daughter, and at least 2 sons lived to adulthood. Wanyue's eldest son passed away early, and her second child miscarried. Now that she is old, she only feels lonely. When Wanyue was young, she was the daughter of Zhang Baozhu, a 5th-rank civil servant in the capital. Amma held a middle-rank official position, so she grew up in luxury and had a decent appearance. When relatives saw her, they praised her for growing up to be wealthy and prosperous. Indeed, when she reached the age of discussing marriage, she was bestowed with the 5th son of Emperor Kangxi, Joro Yin Qi, as the legitimate Fujin. On the 15th day of the 3rd lunar month in the 36th year of the Kangxi reign, Wanyue married Yin Qi. The daughter of a 5th-rank official married the 5th son of the emperor, which was destined to cause a sensation in the capital. It was said that her fate was good. After all, the legitimate Fujin of the other princes of Emperor Kangxi had a much more prestigious status than her. Although she had a noble fate, she did indeed marry the prince and become the daughter-in-law of the royal family. But she is timid, afraid to be spoiled. She thought that being a quail in the backyard would ensure her safety, but she didn't even protect her own child. For this marriage, she just regrets it. In the vast royal mansion, more than 30 years have passed, and at this moment, Wanyue only feels that she may not be able to resist this life-threatening winter. She struggles with her eyelids, unable to express the complex feelings in her heart, only feeling that her life has been too oppressive. She took some ethereal steps, but the snow was still falling, each one falling in a dejected manner. Her feet stepped on the snow, gradually losing their sound. Her eyes gradually closed. If there is an afterlife, I only wish for mutual love and a pair of women's football. In a daze, Wanyue felt a maid pushing her twice next to her. But she ignored it. She felt really tired. Even if she died, she just wanted to close her eyes and have a good sleep at this moment. The maid next to her saw that she had not moved, but instead stood by and scrutinized the side Lucky Jean, who was wearing a red hood and sleeping upside down. She couldn't believe how this young lady behaved on such an important day. It was not until the young lady's dowager, Mrs. Wang, pushed the door in that she stopped her contemplative movements. Wang Mama did not blame her. Even her dowager was at a loss for her young lady's behavior of falling asleep on her wedding day. She frowned and pushed the back of her own young lady. Miss, please don't go to sleep for now. You haven't lifted your head yet. 5 bells will come over to see you go to bed in a while, and you probably won't be happy. Wanyue slept soundly, and a sudden sentence startled her to sit up in her dying dream. She sat up slowly, but what caught her eye was a crimson silk covering her head. She lifted her hand and threw it aside. She looked at the decorations inside the room in surprise. The room was filled with red silk and satin, red candles swaying, vermilion brocade quilts and bed curtains, exquisitely crafted rosewood tables and chairs, and the window lattice was pasted with the word happy. The arrangement of this room made her feel both familiar and unfamiliar. She didn't understand what was going on, thinking she was still in a dream. She raised her hand and pinched her arm, feeling a bit painful. This is not an illusion. She tilted her head, and the 2 people beside the bed looked at her with puzzled eyes. After seeing one of them clearly, her hand began to tremble slightly. Wang Mama, why are you here? Wanyue remembers very clearly that Wang Mama passed away shortly after following her into the Wang mansion. Her appearance here at this moment made her feel uneasy. Wang Mama was looking at her when she heard Wanyue ask, and hurriedly replied, Miss, I am your dowry maid. Today you are getting married, and I have to wait on your side. When the words, big marriage, reached Wanyue's ears, she trembled with fear. Big wedding. She looked incredulous as she walked up to Wang Mama, her eyes full of doubts and wanting to verify. Is this the 5th brother's mansion? Wang Mama looked at her own young lady's surprised expression and nodded awkwardly. She didn't know why the young lady asked, "Miss, Brother Wu had already sealed bail last year. Now this is already Wubble's mansion. Today is the day you enter the mansion, have you forgotten?" Wanyue's mouth twitched slightly, and a thought flashed through her mind. Could it be that, as in the play, the dead can still be reborn? A glimmer of light flashed through her pitch-black eyes. Am I reborn? Seeking collectibles, seeking comments, various requests. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Big Marriage. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2 Big Marriage. The other maid next to her glanced at Wanyue and felt a little sigh. How could there be such a woman? Seems indifferent to one's own marital affairs. Wearing wedding clothes and wandering around the house on the wedding day, and even lifting the lid by oneself, this kind of behavior is unacceptable anywhere. Following such a young master, she couldn't help but worry about her future. Immersed in the joy of rebirth, Wanyue completely ignored the maid's slightly raised eyebrows. She approached Wang Mama, trying to suppress her joy, and said, "So, how good are I, Emma, and Ernyang?" Wang Mama immediately turned her face and smiled, completely unaware of Wanyue's expression. "Miss, didn't you just separate from the master and wife this morning? You are the only Terra family member of his who married the royal family. Although you are a side benefactor of Wu Bail, the master and wife naturally rejoiced in your marriage." Wubble sighed Fujin. For some reason, Wanyue suddenly felt a little flustered, so she instinctively lowered her head and glanced. Indeed, she was wearing a red dress, but the color of the red dress was vermilion. This was the color of the wedding dress worn by Bien Fujin. Only the legitimate Fujin was eligible to have the bright red wedding dress. Has something changed because of my own rebirth? 5 elder brothers granted Dorabelle the title in advance, and her position as the legitimate Fujin in her previous life has now been changed to the side Fujin. Wanyue's face turned pale as she thought of this and couldn't help but ask, who is the current D Fujin? D Fujin is the daughter of the governor Shoasei, Guergia, who married into the royal palace with the young master today. The maid next to her glanced at Wanyue, feeling that this side of Fujin's question today was somewhat strange, but she smiled and answered Wanyue's question. Upon hearing this, Wanyue's eyes moved and she couldn't help but feel a cold sweat on her back. She had no idea that she would be reborn on the day of her wedding to Yin Qi. The outside was filled with drums and music, while the inside was cold and quiet. Apart from her, there was only Wang Mama and a strange maid. Wanyue glanced at the unfamiliar maid. It seemed that there was no one in her previous life's mansion. With a raised eyebrow, Wanyue asked in a deep voice, "What's your name?" The maid heard Wanyue call her, and immediately lowered her eyebrows and eyes, bowing to Wanyue and saying, "I inform you, my lord. My servant's name is Yuji, and he is specially sent by the mansion to serve you." Wanyue nodded slightly and said, "Get up, there's no need for so many rules today." Yuji quickly responded with a yes and stood aside. Wang Mama looked around her, but she was a calm and composed girl. Wanyue walked towards the window and looked up at the night outside. She couldn't help but ask, "Today is the 15th day of the 3rd lunar month." Wang Mama frowned slightly and quickly glanced at Wanyue, who still had the same figure and appearance as her own young lady, without any abnormalities. The young lady's question was indeed strange, but she still replied softly, "Miss, today is exactly 15. In the middle of the day, the moonlight is as bright as day, but the stars are shining brightly and the jade sky is bright." Wanyue slowly sighed. It was such a beautiful night scene, but she didn't know what would happen next. She could only take one step at a time. At the wedding banquet, Yin Qi toasted to everyone from table to table, drinking glasses of wine and gradually feeling slightly tipsy. All the elder brothers raised their glasses to celebrate his marriage to the 2 lucky genes today, but he was too embarrassed to refuse and had to do it with his head down. After 3 rounds of drinking and everyone's dedication, Yin Qi finally got rid of his brothers, and nobles. The eunuch holding a lantern led the way in front, while Yin Qi followed behind crookedly, with several maids and women following behind them. Turning around a corner along the corridor, to the right is the new house of Wufujin, and to the left is the new house of Wufujin. The eunuch, who was close to him, was a bit embarrassed. He quickly took 2 steps back and asked, "Lord Bail, do you want to go to Wufujin first or to Wufujin first?" Yin Qi was already quite drunk, but fortunately his mind was still a bit clear. He lifted his eyes and scanned ahead, his expression instantly becoming complex, and he pondered for a while. "Let's go to Wufujin's place first, remove the cover, and then go to Wufujin's room to rest." Yin Qi's dizzy head began to spin. The noise in the outer hall seemed to be getting louder, and Wanyue's heart became increasingly tense. At this moment, I heard the voice of servants at the door. 5 bells. She stiffened her body, and Wang Mama pulled her back onto the wedding bed between the light and shadow. She quickly put the cover on the side back onto Wanyue's head. After finishing all of this, Grandma Wang breathed a sigh of relief. At the door, Wu Bail had already stumbled and turned in. Since he entered the room, the maids and women behind him also followed into Wanyue's new house, and everyone temporarily rendered the atmosphere inside ambiguous and charming. A sharp-eyed woman handed the scale on the table to Wu Bail, and the red candles swayed throughout the room, reflecting Yin Qi's face red. Wanyue sat on the bed with a dazed expression on her face. She felt infinite panic in her heart and hurriedly thought of ways to deal with it. She secretly glanced at the person next to her through the red veil, but the veil in front of her blocked her view, and she could only see a small area under her feet. Through the red veil, Wanyue couldn't see the expression on Yin Qi's face clearly, so she had to shake her head slightly. A mother.in.law, upon seeing this, eagerly spoke auspicious words. A celestial scale, set with stars at 16, 7 in the north and 6 in the south, embracing blessings, wealth, and longevity. The groom should take his hand slowly. Wanyue's heartbeat reached her throat, and it was obvious that the woman had misunderstood her intentions. She was in a state of confusion when a celestial scale reached under her red cap, as if drawing a few circles, and her red cap was lifted. The atmosphere froze for a few seconds, and the two of them accidentally met in the air. Wanyue's heart moved, and she felt her ears getting hotter and hotter, unable to help but stare at Yin Qi. Yin Qi was also slightly distracted. He raised his eyebrows slightly, and the girl in front of him had smooth skin, red lips and white teeth, and a pair of clear and charming eyes. He pursed his lips, then leaned forward and placed the red cap on the celestial scale on the rosewood table inside the room. Wanyue was mesmerized by Yin Qi's admiration, his bright red attire accentuated his elegance and dignity, and his face became increasingly clean and sharp. But the fate of her past life flashed through her mind, and she immediately regained her sanity. It was important to change her life against the heavens. Wanyue's lips began to tinge with a hint of smile. "Lord Bail, you should go to Wufujin's room tonight to rest." Yin Qi, who had put down his red cap, shook his body for a moment. He raised his face and turned his head in shock to look at Wanyue. Immediately signaled for everyone to leave, and after everyone understood, they all immediately retreated. The last woman to leave casually closed the door, and Wanyue's room returned to tranquility, surprisingly quiet and serene. After a while, Yin Qi finally spoke up and said, "Are you driving Ben Bail away?" Originally, he was only here to pick the blame, but when he heard that the new side Fujin was preparing to send him away, he became interested for a moment. Wanyue looked up at Yin Qi, pondered for a moment, and replied, "If Lord Bail stays in my room tonight, he might end up spoiling me and destroying my wife's reputation. I don't want Wufujin to misunderstand me because of this. My life with Lord Bail is still long, and I hope Lord Bail can understand me." Yin Qi pondered for a moment and looked at the person on the bed. He didn't expect her to say such a thing, so he chuckled a few times and walked unsteadily towards the door. The red candle inside the room was still slowly burning, and Wang Mama, who was guarding outside the door, saw Wu Bail angrily leave the room. After he left, Wang Mama looked into the room in panic and saw Wanyue sitting in a daze. She walked into the room and comforted Wanyue by caressing her shoulder, saying, "Miss, please rest earlier. Tomorrow, you still have to wake up early to offer tea to Di Fujin and the side Fujin who came in earlier." Wanyue nodded awkwardly, and then Wang Mama walked out with peace of mind. That night, Wanyue couldn't sleep at all. She thought about how to change her fate against the heavens all night, but many things were still unclear. She had to first protect herself and then wait for the opportunity to change. The next morning, Wanyue hurriedly finished washing up and went to the room of Di Fujin to offer tea. However, the tongues chewed by the servants along the way almost made her vomit blood. "I heard that the newly arrived Fang Fujin stayed up all night last night, and the candles in the room remained lit until dawn. But I heard that last night, Bien Fujin kicked out Lord Bail in front of everyone, and Lord Bail finally went to Di Fujin's place. I don't know, how did I hear eunuchs say that Lord Bail was supposed to go to Di Fujin's place? That's not clear." Several maidservants were whispering, completely oblivious to the deflated expression on Wanyue's face. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Offering Tea. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Offering Tea. Wanyue didn't expect that there would be rumors about her in just one day. Wang Mama followed behind her and gently advised, "Miss, take it easy. According to the rules, Mr. Bail should have stayed overnight in the legitimate Fujin room last night. You and Mr. Bail have been together for a long time, so there will naturally be times when they will be favored." Wanyue smiled slightly and said, "Do you also believe what they say? I watched the young lady grow up, and the young lady's temper was clear to me. You are not someone who knows right from wrong, and I naturally don't believe what they say." Wang Mama hesitated when she saw Wanyue's expression. The East Warm Pavilion where Guerjia Inan lived was exactly the residence of Wanyue in her past life, and she was familiar with this place. How many midnight nights in her past life, Wanyue could always dream of her premature eldest son and the child who died in her belly before she was born. All of this was thanks to Guerjia Inan, and she had already accumulated a deep grudge with her. In this life, she will not settle for being a quail in the backyard. She will take back everything that belongs to her. As she approached the East Warm Pavilion, the angry expression on Wanyue's face turned to obedience. Two maidservants were guarding at the entrance of the East Warm Pavilion. When they saw someone wearing a silk-colored embroidered butterfly flower cloak, followed by a nanny, they guessed it was the new arrival of Fang Fujin from the Wang mansion yesterday. So they opened the curtain and let her in. Naturally, the nanny stayed outside. Wanyue looked carefully, and one of the maidservants, Yuan, was her close maid in her previous life. Later, she was redeemed at a high price and left the palace. Unexpectedly, in this life, she became the maid of Guerjia Inan. Wanyue walked into the place where she had lived for 37 years, her eyes couldn't help but heat up. Now that she came back, she couldn't help feeling even more desolate. At this moment, there were only a few maids cleaning the main hall. Seeing her here, they didn't know her identity and simply bowed before leaving. The other concubines in the royal palace are still in the future, and the furnishings inside have also changed. In her past life, the auspicious screen of dragon and phoenix that she liked has been replaced with a pair of mandarin ducks and butterflies, and the couplets and plaques seem to have been changed to the style of the Guerjia family. Wanyue's gaze finally lingered on the golden silk throne in the hall, but for a moment, the other concubines seemed to have made an agreement and arrived at a particularly consistent time. In the main hall, pearls and jade shone brightly for a moment, and the sound of warblers and swallows was so joyful. Wanyue squinted her eyes. If she remembered correctly, the person with fair skin and a protruding abdomen was Lu Jiamayan from the side of Fujin. In her past life, there was a son and a daughter who were the eldest sons and daughters of Yin Qi. Later, her eldest son made a mistake, which allowed Guerjia-Inan's son to inherit Yin Qi's title as a prince. However, Wanyue vaguely remembered that her eldest daughter seemed to have been born in September of the 37th year of the Kangxi reign. According to the current time, Lu Jiamiaoyin's plan to conceive her eldest daughter had also been advanced. Wanyue continued to search among these warblers, swallows, but did not see the figure of Baijia Suxin. She couldn't help but feel disappointed that the only woman who had been loyal to her in the mansion in her past life. The other concubines were probably some kind of character, and Wanyue had little impression of them. However, the way they looked at Wanyue made her feel very uncomfortable. One of them said with a cold smile, "Lord Baylor doesn't know why. He will find us two sisters at once. Yeah, I'm afraid this royal mansion is getting lively." Another Gugu squinted his eyes and also looked at Wanyue, carefully observing her expression. As everyone spoke, they only heard the clanging sound. Everyone knew that it was the legitimate Fujin Guerjia who had come out, so they quickly fell silent and welcomed the arrival of this legitimate Fujin. Seeing the true appearance of Di Fujin, everyone looked at each other, wondering whether it was Di Fujin, who was all grand and luxurious. I saw her wearing shoulder-length tassels at both ends of the flag head. In the middle of the flag head were ruby flowers and a blooming peacock tail adorned with emerald hairpins. Her earrings were gold inlaid with ruby earrings, and she was dressed in a lake-like Yunfei makeup floral satin woven colorful butterfly jacket. She wore a pair of phoenix patterned flower pot soled shoes on her feet, which was truly the style of Diffusion. The people in the room saluted one after another when they saw the situation. "I have seen Fujin, and Fujin is auspicious." Guerjia-Inan held on to the hand of her maid Yuxia, walking calmly and leisurely. She sat down on the golden silk chair in the center and just spoke, "Sisters, please get up and take your seats." I saw all the sisters talking so loudly, but what good news is there? Everyone sat down according to their seats, and Wanyue looked at her with a chill in her heart. Gugu on the other side smiled faintly. "It's nothing, but we sisters are lucky. According to the position, we have two more sisters to accompany us." Guerjia-Inan forced a smile and said, "Since my younger sister knows her position, don't forget the rules from now on." That Gugu was intimidated and had to remain silent. Seeing no one speaking again, Guerjia-Inan looked at Wanyue and said, "The silver and gold embellished tassels on Bien Fujin's head are quite unique." Her voice was neither too low nor too low, which could be understood by Wanyue. Among the people sitting here were only two side lucky Jin, but only Wanyue wore a tassel of emerald beads on her head. Wanyue stood up and bowed to Guerjia-Inan, saying, "My body, Terra Wanyue, has seen Fujin. This jewelry on my body can enter Fujin's eyes. It's really my blessing. If Fujin doesn't mind, I will offer it with both hands." Di Fujin Guerjia-Inan didn't look at her either, only raised his hand and casually said, "Sister, get up." "Look at what sister said, sister just looks at your unique attire. You can learn this dress from Sister Wanyue, so that Lord Bail can have more pity on our backyard." Wanyue stood up and declined, retreating to the side with a calm expression. Guerjia-Inan stared at her for a moment, then regained her elegance and wisdom. She said softly, "Yesterday happened, my sister and I actually entered the mansion on the same day. This is really a rare fate." Wanyue nodded slightly and said, "Sister said, it's indeed fate." Seeing Wanyue like this, Guerjia-Inan felt slightly proud in her heart. The elderly grandmother next to her introduced her to the sitting side Fujin and his concubine. When it was Lu Jiamayan's turn, watching her bulging belly, Guerjia-Inan's face slightly froze and then showed a look of envy. After the nanny finished introducing her, she officially entered the tea ceremony. Wanyue held a cup in both hands, bowed her upper body, and extended the cup forward to Guerjia-Inan with both hands. Guerjia-Inan raised her eyebrows before pretending to take it. When Lu Jia Miaoyin from Wufujin arrived, she turned her face and took the teacup handed over by Wanyue. She smiled at Wanyue with a polite expression and said, "Sister, we are both Wufujin. Although I am a few years older than you, I am also someone who serves Lord Bail. You and I don't need to be polite." Wanyue's eyes rolled. Whether in her past life or present, Lu Jiashi from Wufujin had always left a friendly impression on her. "Sister entered the mansion earlier than I did. If I am not as good as a person, I would appreciate your guidance, sister," she said then. The lower-ranked Gugu and his concubine offered tea to Wanyue. After the ceremony was over, Guerjia Inan stood up and looked around the crowd, saying, "Let's stop here for now. Later, I will go to the palace with Lord Bail to pay my respects to my mother. You can leave." Everyone retreated in order, and Wanyue walked out without saying a word. Wang Mama followed closely. At that time, the morning sun had already appeared in the royal mansion, and a gentle breeze brushed against the cheeks. The warm sunshine made several people who had just left the room feel a bit tired. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Entanglement. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Entanglement. Wanyue felt a bit tired and mentally exhausted. As soon as she returned to the room, she undressed and lay in bed to rest. In no time, she fell into a daze and fell asleep. In her sleep, the figures of two children kept swaying in front of her. They surrounded her, and one of the children cried and asked her, "Enyang, this place is so scary. Why don't you have children? Take the children with you quickly, okay?" After saying that, they seemed to be leaving. Wanyue couldn't see their faces clearly, and she didn't know where they were going either. She saw them groping in the darkness, then a glimmer of light appeared ahead, followed by flames everywhere. The two children hissed and shouted at Wanyue, "Help!" Yin Qi looked at Wanyue sleeping on the bed in a daze. She seemed to be sleeping very restlessly, breathing a little quickly, and her face seemed to be unable to cry. A few strands of hair on her forehead were soaked in cold sweat and pressed against her smooth cheeks. Her hands tightly grasped the brocade quilt, desperately pulling it and shouting, "Enyang won't want you, don't be afraid." The words of the two children in the dream were still lingering, and Wanyue felt something brushing her cheeks. There was also a soft sigh in her ear, as if a suppressed emotion was secretly breathing. Wanyue was immediately startled and woke up. She opened her eyes and calmed down. Fortunately, she had only had a dream just now, but what she saw in front of her surprised her a bit. Candlelight had already been lit in the room, and the stars and moon were hiding. Only a gentle breeze blew through the window and made a slight sound. The candlelight in the room was slightly shaken by the wind, and Wang Mama and Yu Ji were not in the room. Surprisingly, next to her was Yin Qi. Wanyue didn't expect Yin Qi to appear in her room. Seeing that it was Yin Qi, Wanyue's nerves relaxed slightly. She propped up one hand and stood by the edge of the bed, supporting her body. She tilted her head to one side, gathered her scattered hair, and prepared to stand up and salute. Yin Qi sat by Wanyue's bed, guessing that she had a nightmare, but he didn't pay attention to what Wanyue was saying. But he didn't expect Wanyue to suddenly wake up, and the hand that was supposed to lightly caress Wanyue's cheek stiffened in mid-air. Seeing Wanyue stand up, he immediately pressed down the hand that was frozen in mid-air and said, "You seem to be feeling a bit uncomfortable. Did you have a nightmare? Let's skip the salute for now." His eyes were filled with visible tenderness and pity, and his eyes inexplicably reminded Wanyue of the he in her memory. Wanyue's face instantly showed a hint of confusion, and Yin Qi's hand was still resting on the back of her hand. Wanyue instinctively shook her head, withdrew her hand, turned her head, and avoided Yin Qi's handsome face. Her lips were a bit dry at the moment, and the tea was placed on the rosewood table, some distance from the bed. She swallowed her throat and suddenly stood up, walking to the rosewood table to drink tea. At this moment, Yin Qi's eyes narrowed slightly and he said calmly, "I heard you slept for a long time today. You've been sleeping until now, and it's already one night. Wanyue's hand holding the teacup was slightly taken aback. What does he mean by this? He probably didn't want to stay in her room tonight. With this in mind, Wanyue shook her teacup in her hand and awkwardly replied, Mr. Bale, I'm just a bit tired from yesterday's marriage, so I'm a bit sleepy today. Upon hearing these words, Yin Qi smiled at the corners of his mouth and his voice sounded, forget it, let's call you Wanyue. Ben Bale will rest in your room tonight, which will make you less tired. As Yin Qi spoke, he walked towards Wanyue and looked at her up and down with his eyes full of undisguised joy. Wanyue looked at Yin Qi with a faint smile, but her heart was very uneasy. She really doesn't want to be spoiled at this time. She finally got reborn. She doesn't want to follow the old path. It's not too late to be spoiled when she has the ability to deal with malicious people. Wanyue hesitated for a moment, but her head acted in the opposite direction to her thoughts. Noguatsi nodded and her clear eyes looked at Yin Qi, saying, Mr. Bale, Yin Qi looked at Wanyue quietly, with a pair of black eyes staring at her. Wanyue's gaze was slightly lowered, and her eyebrows did not make people feel gorgeous or vulgar. However, the candlelight reflected her face as if it were a flower like jade, with a faint flicker of hope. He suddenly reached out his hand and took Wanyue into his arms. Wanyue passively leaned against his chest, and he tightened his arm along the way. Then, he wrapped his other hand around her back, slowly lowered his head, and placed his lips on Wanyue's lips. Without any warning, Wanyue's hands and feet were softened by the kiss, and she could only snuggle up in Yin Qi's arms, lifting her hands around Yin Qi's neck. The last time they kissed, she couldn't even remember when it was too long ago. Yin Qi seemed to exert all his strength on his lips, kissing Wanyue fiercely. Her lips were soft and fragrant, and for a moment, he even wanted to kiss her to the bone, making the two of them one. Wanyue was kissed with red and hot cheeks, and the two of them were intertwined, unable to distinguish who had the upper hand. Just as the breath of the kiss slowed down and the moaning on Wanyue's mouth slowed down, she was about to catch her breath when she raised her hand to resist Yin Qi's unexpected kiss. Yin Qi also restrained himself and stopped, controlling the heat in his heart. His mouth opened and closed, his gaze fixed on Wanyue's fair neck, trying to regain his breath and thoughts. In this situation, Wanyue wanted to pretend to be shy and make the woman who had experienced a bed romance in her previous life unconsciously dumbfounded. She deliberately twisted it and even rested it on Yin Qi's chest, so that she didn't have to see his fierce expression. The two of them were very close together. Yin Qi frowned and his Adam's apple rolled up and down unconsciously. His gaze was a bit scattered, and he raised his hand to wipe Wanyue's lips. Gradually, the fire burned into his heart. He hugged Wanyue's waist tightly, pressed his head against her neck, closed his eyes, and breathed faster. He kissed Wanyue's neck, behind her ears, cheeks, and nose all the way to the corner of her mouth. The two of them were gently entwined, and Yin Qi suddenly murmured the name of Wanyue. Wanyue responded in a daze. Until the two gradually calmed down their moans and hugged each other like this, only the sound of their heartbeat could be heard. Wanyue slowly lowered her head, concealing the emotions in her eyes. Yin Qi lowered his head and looked at Wanyue. Normally, the progress that should have been lingering and sorrowful did not go according to his expectations at all. She didn't show the panic and shyness that Wufujin showed last night, nor did she cover her face and be overly coquettish. She didn't look like Wufujin had a muscular and weak appearance, and Wanyue was more calm than him, like an old hand. The room suddenly quieted down, and Wanyue knew that it was not the right time for Lord Bale to pity her. Her previous life of being so obedient was only a result of her son's premature death, so it was better to temporarily leave her favor in the future. She trembled in her heart and quickly asked Yin Qi, I am grateful for the love of Lord Bale, and I am overjoyed. But can I conceive a few years later? After speaking, Wanyue looked up at Yin Qi, who seemed startled by her words and was somewhat surprised by her thoughts. The other concubines were eager to get pregnant soon, but Yin Qi's heart was filled with doubts about Wanyue at this moment. He looked straight at Wanyue with a sharp insight into everything and a hint of confusion. Why do you think so? Upon hearing this, Wanyue felt very embarrassed and looked at Yin Qi's coat, which had already been torn apart by her. Actually, Bail Yi is extraordinary in appearance, knowledgeable and talented. It would be great to have children with Bail Yi. However, I just wanted to be more carefree for a few more years so that I could spend more time with Bail Yi and get pregnant in a few years. Yin Qi saw Wanyue's deceitful expression and heard her praise him like this. Immediately, his face lit up with joy, and his heart was even more comfortable than when Emperor Amat bestowed upon him the title of Dorabelle. He raised his eyes slightly, his index finger slightly bent, tapped on the rosewood table, and a smile appeared on his face. I hope we can be together for a while, maybe we can stay together for a long time. Then he stood up and tidied up his coat, then let's go. After he finished speaking, he waved his hand to Wanyue. After watching Yin Qi go out, Wanyue patted her chest and felt relieved. She then took 2 sips of tea from the side and drank it smoothly. I'm afraid only I understand the truth that I don't want to get pregnant too early now. In the second half of the night, Wanyue lay tossing and turning in bed, struggling to fall asleep for a while. She only listened quietly to the sound outside the room, as if she had already hit the 3rd watch. Seeking collection, seeking recommendation tickets, seeking comments, and various requests. End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Beating. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Beating. The next day was extremely clear and beautiful weather. When Wanyue went out, she looked up at the sky and saw that there were completely blue clouds in the sky, and there was no trace of dark clouds. Her heart became cheerful, feeling that the slowly flowing clouds in the sky were also moving with her own pace. She followed the copying corridor and walked towards the garden. The other concubines in Baylor's mansion seemed to have also taken advantage of such good weather to come out for activities. From afar, someone could be heard humming softly, "Lotus can be harvested in Jiangnan, where are the fields of lotus leaves. Fish play among the lotus leaves. Fish play among the east, west, south, and north of the lotus leaves." Before Guerjia Inan could approach, she heard the sound and blurted out to the maid beside her, who is singing the song. Grandma Gui next to her lowered her head and said, "Fujin, I'll go take a look." After speaking, she took a brisk step towards the direction where the humming sound appeared. With a bold glance, she saw a woman wearing a purple robe sitting on a small pavilion stone bench in the garden, like Zhang Gij, the concubine who came to the Fujin room yesterday to pay her respects. She furrowed her brow and turned around. The stone steps in the garden corridor were a bit slippery. She quickly stepped forward and supported the arm of Di Fujin, whispering, "Fujin, that humming woman looks like Zhang Gij who came to pay respects yesterday." Guerjia Inan was stunned for a moment, looked up towards the direction of the pavilion, and silently walked towards that position. She had a light gait, and Zhang Gij stayed in the pavilion, humming selflessly without hearing the sound of Di Fujin walking. Guerjia Inan stopped at the pavilion for a long time, and when she saw Zhang Gij looking ecstatic, she couldn't help but ask the maid next to her, Yuan, to push Zhang Gij's shoulder. Zhang Gij was pushed and forced to stop humming. She was momentarily angry and said, "Who the hell is bothering Ben Gij to sing?" She cursed and turned her head, only to see Di Fujin and her maid standing in the pavilion. She quickly stood up and saluted Di Fujin. Guerjia Inan chuckled coldly, "Who do you think should die? Dare to curse me, you too, get her for me." Just as Zhang Gij was about to explain, she was grabbed by Yuan and another maid on both arms, struggling desperately. Obviously, the 2 maids beside her did not let her go. "Di Fujin, it's not as you think. I was just in a moment of impatience and would just talk nonsense without seeing the person coming." Zhang Gij defended herself loudly, her voice catching the attention of those walking towards the garden again. Wanyue wandered around the garden, but still couldn't see by Jia Suxin's figure. A strange premonition surged in her heart. She remembered that Su Xian had lived in the East Wing room in her previous life, so she decided to go to the East Wing room today to take a look. But I heard a sound coming from the pavilion, and Zhuanzi twisted her hand. Can't Guerjia Yinan hold her breath like this? She had only been in the mansion for 2 days and wanted to take action against the concubines below. Guerjia Yinan remained calm and tried to maintain her identity as the legitimate Fujin, but she didn't spare anyone by saying, "You didn't even consider me as the legitimate Fujin, did you?" The old lady next to Guerjia Yinan walked over directly and stood in front of Zhang Gij. She raised her hand and gave Zhang Gij a few harsh slaps, which were particularly loud. The masters and servants in the garden listened attentively. This slap is disrespectful to your esteemed position, and even contemptuous of Di Fujin. This slap is hitting you, speaking wildly and being extremely reckless. This slap was given to you by the old slave. Zhang Gij looked at her in fear and said, "If you touch me, you won't be able to eat and walk around." The nanny calmly bent down and the sweat on her forehead landed on Zhang Gij's cheek. The nanny immediately patted Zhang Gij's cheek and then waved her palm. Zhang Gij's mouth was covered in a shred of blood, and she gave the old lady a cold glance. She held back tears in her eyes and solemnly cursed Guerjia Yinan in her heart. After Guerjia Yinan and her maids walked out of the pavilion, she couldn't help but shed tears, bent down, and fell deeply towards the floor inside the pavilion. Entering the pavilion, Wanyue was startled by her actions and quickly stepped forward to support her. Yuji followed behind Wanyue and also stepped forward to help hold on to Zhang Gij. Zhang Gij was originally a beautiful woman with jade-like skin, but now her cheeks are covered in many red marks, and a hint of blood is still appearing at the corners of her mouth. Her clothes are also a bit messy, and her hair bun is fluffy, like a hair bun that hasn't been combed up yet. Seeing Zhang Gij's experience, Wanyue's heart instantly stirred up a storm, forcing herself to calm down. Zhang Gij's body trembled slightly as he stood up, his whole body trembling. Zhang Gij saw someone coming to help him, and his expression slowly calmed down, but there was a hint of ferocity in his heart. Her current appearance made it difficult for Wanyue to leave her, so she helped her and said, "Sister, I'll take you back." Zhang Gij shook her head. Her current predicament does not require sympathy from others. "Yeah, Zhang Gij, you can let our young master take you back together." Yuji tried her best to persuade Zhang Gij when she saw that he didn't agree. Although Zhang Gij initially had a refusal, he nodded in agreement when he saw Fang Fujin's resolute attitude. She had some doubts about Fujin's attitude towards her, not knowing if Wanyue was really kind to her or if she had other intentions. But for Di Fujin Gua Jia Yinan, she only has hatred towards her in her heart. The three of them walked along the garden to the backyard. Wanyue pondered all the way and was not very clear about the identity of the other maid and nanny beside Guerjia Yinan. Today, the nanny's behavior was probably also a powerful character, so she turned her head to look at Yuji beside her. "Yuji, how long have you been in this mansion?" Yuji was taken aback for a moment, then recalled for a moment and quickly replied, "I would like to inform you, young master. I came to Bale Mansion last year. Do you know the names of the maids and maids next to Di Fujin?" Wanyue was slightly surprised and didn't expect that Yuji had entered the mansion last year. The elderly one is Grandma Goe, the one with a slightly round face next to her is Yuxia, and the other is Yuan. Yuji replied again, and Zhang Gij in between endured the pain in her cheeks, listening to their conversation carefully. Wanyue and Yuji followed Zhang Gij along the way until they reached Zhang Gij's house, where her maid hurriedly helped him into the room. Zhang Gij lives in the east wing of the backyard, just 100 meters away from the east warm pavilion of Guerjia Yinan. Wanyue is worried about her situation, and according to Guerjia Yinan's temperament, Zhang Gij's future may not be easy. After thanking Wanyue and the others, the maid took out the ointment from the box in the room and gently spread it on Zhang Gij's bruised cheek. After applying the medicine, she stood up straight and brewed tea for Wanyue. While she was brewing tea, Wanyue vaguely saw a slight bruise on her arm. After that, she quietly retreated to the side. Wanyue looked at the courteous and steady maid and asked in a deep voice, "What's your name?" She replied softly, "I report to Fujin, the servant Yudon, who is serving Zhang Gij." Wanyue nodded and couldn't disturb Zhang Gij anymore. She stood up and instructed Yudon, "Take good care of your family Gij." After speaking, he bid farewell and left the door. Wanyue didn't take a few steps and looked around the room. One of the doors was tightly closed and the windows were also tightly closed, which should be the room where Su Xin lived in her memory. She walked towards the room, emitting a fragrant scent of sandalwood. She couldn't help but approach and push the door, which opened with a gentle push. The interior decoration is somewhat rudimentary, with only a few camphor wood cabinets, a red-painted beechwood 6-column gold-plated landscape frame bed, and a somewhat shabby table. Sushin was painting on the table, and Wanyue stared intently. However, the paintings on the table shook Wanyue's heart. It was a portrait of Yin Qi. Seeing Sushin again, Wanyue's eyes involuntarily turned red. Sushin was very beautiful, but her cheeks seemed slightly slimmer than in her previous life. The jade bracelet on her wrist swayed empty, as if it was about to fall off at any moment. She was wearing a light green satin embroidered begonia patterned toilet robe, as fresh and elegant as in her previous life. Wanyue approached gently and shouted softly, "Sushin." Bai Jiasuxin heard voices and looked up. She didn't know the person coming, so they opened the door without her consent and walked in. She immediately stiffened her face, furrowed her brows, raised her hand to drive them out, and shouted in an unusually stern voice, "Who are you? Why did you come into my room? Please go out." Her stern face didn't look like an 18-year-old girl at all. Wanyue was startled by her aura and spoke with a slight sense of injustice, "I didn't mean to." Wanyue secretly sighed that Su Xin, a good sister who had been loyal to her in previous lives, had such a harsh side. Yuji next to her was stunned for a moment, then reacted and eagerly grabbed Bai Jiasuxin's hand. "Bai Jiasher, you shouldn't treat Fong Fujin like this. We just sent Zhang Gij back and stopped by your room to take a look." Sushin's face changed after hearing this, and she immediately stopped talking. Wanyue looked at her with a hint of compassion in her eyes and a hint of pity in her heart. After thinking for a moment, she spoke up and asked, "Isn't it a bit sad for my sister to be alone in this boudoir? Even if she doesn't go out all day, she will feel suffocated." Bai Jiasuxin's beautiful eyes stopped on Wanyue's face, wondering why Fong Fujin, who had only been in the mansion for 2 days, would come to her room. She was used to being oppressed in this mansion, and her heart trembled slightly. "Thank you very much for your concern, sister. If sister is willing to enjoy herself in this room, she won't bother her. I won't disturb you for now. My sister can come to my room more often when she has time," Wanyue said. Completely unexpected in this situation, there seemed to be a hint of sobbing in Wanyue's words, and she tried her best to control her emotions and walked out of Sushin's room. Bai Jiasuxin stood at the door of the room, watching as Wanyue's figure walked away step by step. She doesn't have many friends in this mansion, but she has a strong desire to guard against others. Seeking collections, seeking comments, various seeks, end of this chapter. Chapter 6. Complaints. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6 Complaints. It was still early in the morning, and before noon, the scorching sun was already shining brightly on everything in Baylor's mansion. Wanyue was a bit dazzled by the sunlight, so she had to stride back to the west warm pavilion from the east wing room. As soon as she returned to the room, the heat inside was even hotter than outside. The room was obviously a bit stuffy, and after walking for some time, she gradually felt a bit hot on her body. She had to instruct Yuji to open all the windows inside the room. Wang Mama was busy ordering several other servants to sweep outside the house. Wanyue quickly sat down and poured a cup of tea herself, drinking it all in one gulp. She then took out the handkerchief from her sleeve to wipe the sweat off her forehead, feeling that it wasn't as hot before tucking it back into her sleeve. After a while, someone knocked on the door a few times with a da-da-da sound. Wanyue was puzzled, but she heard Lu Jia's beautiful voice. Sister is fine. I came to talk to you about our daily life, didn't I disturb you? Wanyue was a bit surprised. She didn't expect Lu Jiamayan to come and find her on her own. She quickly got up and walked to the door to greet her, saying, "How could you disturb me? I wish my sister would come to my room often." Lu Jiamayan's smile seemed particularly cheerful. She had a beautiful appearance, fair skin, and a silk twin phoenix fruit jade hairpin slanted above her head, which was of great value at first glance. She wore a somewhat loose coat and spoke with a gentle and approachable tone. Behind her was Zhang Mama, and Wanyue had some impression of her. When Zhang Mama passed away in her previous life, Lu Jiamayan cried uncontrollably, feeling sad for a long time, which was enough to show the deep love between the master and servant of the two. Lu Jiamayan now has a big belly, and Wanyue carefully helped her walk to the rosewood table and sat down. She then instructed Yuji standing beside her, "Yuji, serve tea." Yuji calmly blessed Lu Jiamayan and respectfully placed the poured tea in front of her table. But Lu Jiamayan didn't care about the tea, and instead said calmly to Chao Wanyue, "Sister, have you heard about what happened in the garden today?" Sigh. This Wufujin may not be easy to get along with, and we may be sad in the future. Wanyue listened with great respect on her face. After all, Lu Jiamayan followed Yin Qi all the way to the palace from Gu and gave birth to Yin Qi's eldest son. She is still pregnant with one. What's wrong with my sister's Sai? She was the first to enter the mansion and gave birth to the eldest son of Lord Bale. According to her status and rules, even Wufujin dare not do anything to you. But it's me, she's afraid she's treating me like a thorn in her side. Wanyue looked at Lu Jiamiaoyin, thinking that she was the most stable. Upon hearing these words, Lu Jiamayan had a calm expression on her face. Wanyue couldn't tell anything. In her past life, she didn't have much interaction with Lu Jiamayan. Most of the time, Lu Jiamayan only came to her room to complain about the competition between Guerjia and Yinan, but Wanyue was powerless at that time. Wanyue only knew that she belonged to the Han military flag, and her father Lu Wenhuan was a military official with the rank of 6th grade. Today's scene between the two was somewhat reminiscent of before Wanyue's rebirth, which couldn't help but make Wanyue sigh. The two of them chatted a little more, and it was almost 6:15 p.m. when Lu Jiamayan left Wanyue's room satisfied with her lunch. After watching her leave, Wanyue sat back in the room, drinking hot tea and calculating how to avoid the tragedy of her past life from happening again. Wang Mama walked in from outside and couldn't help feeling a little uneasy as she looked deep in thought on her face. She could only ask cautiously, "Miss, do you still remember tomorrow? What's going on tomorrow?" Wanyue turned her head and looked at Wang Mama with a suspicious expression on her face. After listening to Wanyue's words, Grandma Wang shook her head helplessly and said, "Miss, tomorrow is the 3rd day of your marriage to Lord Baylor. According to etiquette, you need to come back." Wanyue woke up from a dream and immediately understood. Thinking that she would be able to return home tomorrow, she was also delighted in her heart. Because she can see Emma and Eunyoung, she really misses them. "Yeah, why did I forget to come back? Thank you for reminding Grandma. However, Miss, tomorrow, you will come back with Mr. Baylor, don't forget," Wang Mama frowned and reminded. Wang Mama also explained some rules of returning home to Wanyue. Wanyue had a clever personality and had also experienced returning home in her previous life, so she was completely transparent. Wanyue's identity was that of Bian Fujin from the Bale mansion. On the 3rd day of marriage, she could return home. On the 9th day after the legitimate Fujin returned home, Wanyue did not expect to win over Guerjia Inan first in this matter. Lunch is a little bit of congee. Wanyue has no appetite at all. Although she is Fang Fujin now, she doesn't need to abuse her in eating. Looking at the difficult-to-swallow food on the table, Wanyue remembered that when she was young at home, the food was better than it is now. From the moment she remembered it, Emma was a fifth-grade member of the staff. His official position was barely divided into a courtyard of 2 courtyards, with a total of 7 rooms. Emma's salary supported the family's expenses and he never mistreated her in terms of food. However, later on, Amma remained neutral in the party struggle between Soatu and Nalan Mingzhu, which led to poor official luck. He held a 5th-grade civil service title in the capital, although diligent and never promoted, while his colleagues with inferior abilities had good official luck. Alma's frustration in the officialdom ultimately led him to die unable to let go. But Yin Yang suffered from a cough, and in the end, the doctor was helpless. She could only watch Yin Yang die in despair. Thinking of all the things in her past life, Wanyue sighed. This life will definitely become better, she will definitely do it. At 10:15 on the second day, Grandma Wang came to the room and woke up Wanyue. At a moment in the morning, he had breakfast. Before Wanyue could step out of the house, Yin Qi was already waiting at the entrance of the palace. After waiting for 3/4 of an hour without seeing Wanyue come out, the groom at the door was waiting, feeling quite unhappy. Yin Qi also remained calm, and the close servant beside him had extremely sharp eyes. Seeing that Lord Bale's expression was displeased, he quickly turned over and bowed and asked, "Master, why don't I go and urge you? I'll follow Fujin." Yin Qi nodded silently when he saw his cleverness. The servant received permission and was about to get up when he heard a series of sounds that were very similar to the sound of horse hooves, and he immediately felt a sense of confidence in himself. The sound of the flower-pot-soled shoes worn by these Fujin people walking on the road is very similar to the sound of horse hooves. He turned around and bent slightly towards Yin Qi, saying, "I have informed you, Lord, that the side of Fujin has come out." Yin Qi looked at the entrance of the Wang mansion in surprise. Wanyue was dressed in a magenta silk embroidered golden butterfly-patterned auspicious robe, with a double-taped edge and a white peony pattern on the outer edge. The flag was adorned with pink silk flowers, light blue tassels, and ruby pendants, exuding a bright feeling. Wanyue's attire made Yin Qi pursed his lips, and his anger had dissipated just now. Wanyue saw Yin Qi waiting at the door and immediately showed a beautiful and dignified smile on her face. After approaching Yin Qi, Wanyue timidly bowed. On the carriage, Yin Qi was a bit absent-minded. He turned his head to look at Wanyue and said, "Are you going out so late today just for this outfit?" Wanyue nodded and murmured softly, "I didn't think about how you used to go out in your past life, so I followed the approximate time to go out. What does this have to do with your clothes and attire? What are you muttering about?" Yin Qi saw her muttering something in a low voice, but didn't hear it clearly, so he approached Wanyue and asked. Yin Qi's sudden approach brought the distance between her 2 lips to within a millimeter. Wanyue only felt the heat behind her ears start to boil, and that touch of heat burned all the way to her cheeks. She blushed and glanced at Yin Qi, then forced a smile on her face. "No, I just wanted to go back and feel relieved for a moment," she said after speaking. Wanyue clenched her lips tightly. After a long silence, Yin Qi only said, "The carriage is shaking a bit, you're sitting well." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Return to the door. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Return to the door. Yin Qi's tone was so calm, but Wanyue didn't take it to heart. At this moment, in her heart, Emma and Enyang were the most important. Wanyue's maternal home is located between the Shidong Archway and Dongzaimen, and is the residence of the Zhengbai Banner people in the Beijing Banner. Bale Mansion is located on the North Street inside Chaoyang Gate, and the 2 houses are not far apart. The carriage arrived in less than half an hour, and Wanyue's Emma Zhang Baozhu and her daughter Ta La were eager for their daughter. They stood at the entrance of Zhang's mansion to watch at an instant. At this moment, the carriage finally arrived. Zhang Baozhu took a few steps forward with the people in the mansion, and Yin Qi got out of the carriage first. Wanyue sat upright in the carriage and glanced at the Zhang mansion in her impression through the gap in the carriage curtain. The past and past seemed to be intertwined in her heart, and she couldn't help but feel like a dream. Wanyue's memory was captivating. Yin Qi saw that she hadn't come out yet and lifted the curtain of the carriage, feeling a little surprised. Why was she still sitting upright on the carriage? And there seemed to be 2 lines of tears hanging on her cheeks on both sides. Yin Qi frowned, and his bright eyes fell on Wanyue with a hint of scrutiny. "What's wrong with you?" Yin Qi asked in an extremely low voice. Wanyue felt a bit embarrassed and quickly took out her handkerchief to wipe away the few tears of joy and tears. "I just want to see Emma and Eunyoung, but it's hard to hide my excitement." Wanyue couldn't hide her trembling heart. She just saw Emma and Eunyoung standing at the door, they both became younger, and the few servants around her were familiar to her. This reality finally made her accept the fact of rebirth. Yin Qi felt a bit strange, not like a life or death separation, but after only 3 days of marriage, he missed home like this. How can he live his future? But he still reached out his hand, and Wanyue looked at him. She put her left hand on the back of his hand and stepped off the carriage with her foot raised. Yin Qi took advantage of this and grabbed Wanyue's hand, holding it together like this. The actions of Wanyue and Yin Qi caught the attention of Zhang Baozhu, his Terra family, and several servants standing in front of Zhang's mansion. 5 elder brothers treated Wanyue well, and they felt relieved. Wanyue got off the carriage, and Zhang Baozhu took the lead in bowing. Everyone followed his movements and bowed. "I would like to offer my greetings to Wu Bail and Bien Fujin. Lord Bail is blessed with peace and prosperity, and Bien Fujin is blessed with peace and prosperity." Wanyue had mixed feelings in her heart, but due to her status, her family had to bow to her. Yin Qi pulled her up and helped Zhang Baozhu and his Terra family. "No need to be polite, get up quickly." After a round of greetings, Yin Qi instructed his attendants to move the gifts from the car into Zhang's mansion. It was only then that Wanyue saw the cart of returning gifts behind her, which seemed to be more than when she returned in her previous life. The servants were busy carrying gifts when Zhang Baozhu made a gesture of invitation. "Wu Bail, please enter the mansion first." Yin Qi nodded, turned his face to look at it again, then let go of his hand and followed Zhang Baozhu to enter the house first. Wanyue followed Eunyoung and his Terra family into the door. Mammy Wang and her old sisters Mammy Li chatted with each other behind Wanyue. Wanyue looked at the scene at home and shook her head helplessly. Compared to the Wang mansion, this home was not on the table. After entering the main hall, Wanyue and Yin Qi needed to offer tea to Zhang Baozhu and his Terra family according to etiquette. Li Mama, at some point, picked up a vermilion wooden tray and handed it to Wanyue and Yin Qi. The two brought the tea and presented it to him and Zhang Baozhu, respectively. Zhang Baozhu picked it up and took a sip, secretly sighing. The aroma of this tea was overflowing, it was really top quality. He couldn't help but take another sip, like a high quality Yuqian Longjing. It was indeed something from the royal family, just better than anything from their ordinary official family. Yin Qi saw that his father-in-law seemed very satisfied with the tea, and his smile was also warm. "Your father-in-law likes this tea. I'll have the servants in the mansion bring some to you another day." Zhang Baozhu was stunned for a moment. It was excellent to have a prince as his son-in-law. He nodded with satisfaction and said, "That servant thanks Wu Bail." Wanyue's face suddenly changed, and Emma was really not polite. He sat quietly on the side, glancing at Yin Qi very naturally. The gift he sent today clearly exceeded the share that Fang Fujin should have. She remembered the discussion between the two ladies she met in the village when she went out a few days ago. It was probably said that Wu Bail had requested the emperor to marry him last year, which led to the situation of marrying two Wufujin women at the same time this year. At that time, Terra did not argue with the two ladies, but secretly worried about his daughter. Now that Wu Bail treats her daughter with great care, she feels at ease. She smiled and took a sip of tea, perhaps in a hurry. After swallowing the tea, she coughed urgently twice. Wanyue felt very worried when she saw Yin Yang's cough. The etiquette and rules to be followed when returning home were finally completed. Wanyue and Yin Qi stood up, and Zhang Baozhu took Yin Qi to the study to discuss matters. After they left, Wanyue stepped forward and tightly hugged Enyang and Terra. Wanyue smiled in her heart, saying that she was even happier to be reborn and see her family again than to have a priceless treasure. Terra was also overjoyed, and a few days ago, he was worried about his daughter's sadness and didn't know where to withdraw. The outside of the room was sprinkled with golden sunshine, and one or two rays of sunlight penetrated through the main hall window, slanting onto the stone slabs inside the room, providing an irresistible warmth. After the mother and daughter hugged each other for a while, Terra finally pushed aside Wanyue's embrace and took her hand back to the room, saying that she knew how to speak to herself. Wang Mama and Li Mama followed behind them. As soon as he arrived at the room, Terra began coughing again. Wanyue approached her with concern and pounded her back. She slowed down her voice and couldn't help but say softly, "Enyang, I'm very worried about you. It's better to find a doctor to take a look. It's not a big problem, just occasionally coughing and not stopping, there's no need to ask a doctor," he said, looking at his daughter and swallowing the phlegm that had not yet been coughed up in his throat. Wanyue's gaze fell on Enyang's lips. The first half of her speech earlier was clearly a bit hoarse, and she still, "Your Alma's annual salary is only 80 taels of silver. After deducting the expenses of the government, there is nothing left. There is no need to ask a doctor for such a minor illness that is not troublesome. No way, for the sake of your own health, you can listen to me and must invite a doctor to come and see. In a few days, I will have Wang Mama go back to the mansion to inspect. If you haven't invited a doctor by then, I will personally come back to supervise you. If the silver is not enough, then take the East Pearl, Jade, and Ruby from the gift sent by Lord Bail to pawnshop. In any case, I won't allow you to be sick and not invite a doctor." Terra could hardly believe his ears, and she looked at Wanyue in surprise. Her daughter was so concerned about her now, so she compromised and couldn't let her filial piety go to waste. Seeing that Yin Yang seemed moved, Wanyue took out a few coins of silver from her purse and stuffed them into his Terra family's hands. Terra family refused without even thinking, "Yin Yang, don't want it. It's probably not easy for you to be in the royal mansion. I heard that Guarujia was a powerful character before she entered the mansion. You can save the money to send the servants away. It's also easy to handle things when faced with difficulties." Terra's eyes were filled with genuine concern for his daughter. Wanyue's eyes were warm and she said, "Enyang, you don't have to worry about me. I will take care of myself, and you don't have to worry about the silver. Enyang, rest assured that your daughter will live well, and you will also let Emma and you live well. So you must not refuse to hire a doctor just for a few taels of silver. Besides, your son-in-law is at least a belle, so you don't need to save money. Only when you and Emma are both healthy, can I feel at ease." He nodded at Terra and had to say that her daughter Wanyue had grown up and would be hurting people. He smiled and agreed, without saying anything extra. Li Mama stood on the side, gazing at the warmth of her wife and young lady. In a faint sense, she seemed to see the little girl who used to love and often stick to her grow up. The lively little girl had become a dignified, steady, and caring Fujin. It would be great if the young lady could become the legitimate son, so that her child would not be bullied in the future. Li Mama secretly hopes that this private idea can be fulfilled. According to etiquette, one does not have dinner at their mother's house when returning home. After a cup of tea, Wanyue estimated that it was getting late. After some thought, she said to Eunyoung and Li Mama, "Eunyoung, please rest for a while. Let Li Mama help you record those gifts. I'll go to Emma's room first. Wang Mama, please wait for me in the main hall." He nodded and could only swallow the unspoken words, instructing Wanyue, "Then you go. Eunyoung will invite a doctor to come and see." In the study, Zhang Baozhu was enthusiastically chatting with Yin Qi about business, and it was only when Wanyue stood beside them with her hands down that they noticed. Zhang Baozhu saw his daughter and spoke up first, "Have you finished talking to your aunt?" Wanyue nodded obediently and then spoke softly, "Mr. Bale, I want to say some personal words to Emma, can you?" Upon seeing this, Yin Qi turned his eyes and nodded slightly towards Zhang Baozhu, then turned his head to look at Wanyue before walking towards the main hall of Zhang's mansion. After he left, Wanyue ran over and hugged Zhang Baozhu. Zhang Baozhu was stunned by his daughter's embrace, and it took him a while to recall the last time he hugged his daughter, which was when she was very young, more than a decade had passed. After Zhang Baozhu regained his senses, he couldn't help but feel worried about his daughter's strange behavior. He asked, "Yue, have you been wronged in the Bale mansion?" Wanyue let go of her hand and shook her head with a smile, "Emma, I haven't been wronged. I just miss you and Eunyoung very much, that's why I'm hugging you two today." After hearing this, Zhang Baozhu immediately smiled. His daughter was sensible, and his son-in-law was also a prince. The Zhang family was also able to endure well. Wanyue saw that Emma was in a good mood at the moment and spoke leisurely, "Emma, I want to inquire about some matters related to the court so that I can share some of Wu Bale's worries." Zhang Baozhu understood his daughter's meaning. Although there was no need to inquire about the court affairs in the inner residence, it was not an exaggeration to know at all. He said Wanyue and listened attentively, silently taking notes in his heart. Wanyue was relieved for a moment. She learned from Alma that only the eldest elder brother Yin Yi, the crown prince Yin Ren, the third elder brother Yin Ji, the fourth elder brother Yin Zhen, and the fifth elder brother Yin Qi were among the several elder brothers in the palace who had already been divided. Except for the crown prince, the other brothers are currently titled Dorabelle. When they returned to the main hall, Yin Qi and his Terra family sat politely in their respective positions, and they seemed to have little conversation. Wanyue saw this scene and found it quite amusing. Wanyue instructed Yin Yang to ask the doctor for medical treatment in the main hall, and also told Amma about Yin Yang's cough, which made her feel at ease. After chatting a few more words, I heard Mr. Bale's close servant standing at the entrance of the hall, reminding me in a sharp voice, "Mr. Bale, it's getting late and it's time to go back to the mansion." Even though Zhang Baozhu and his Terra family were extremely reluctant to part ways, they could not face the separation. When Wanyue walked out of Zhang's mansion, she turned around and saw that Amma and Eunyoung were separated from her by a foot, and all three of them had an expression of reluctance to part ways. The carriage had already set off, and Wanyue's throat choked up. She lifted the curtain and turned back to look at Amma and Eunyoung at the door, until she could never see them again. Seeking collection, seeking monthly tickets, seeking comments, various requests. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. Request. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8 Request. On the carriage, Yin Qi gave Wanyue a few meaningful glances. The carriage shook his gaze, as if something was struggling to pop out of his eyes. He expected a burst of emotion, but he tried to hold it back. Wanyue, who was sitting opposite him, had not ridden a carriage for a long time and felt like the carriage was about to scatter her body. Finally, she arrived at the entrance of the Wang mansion. After getting off the carriage, Wanyue walked with a slightly heavy step. Before she could step into the Wang mansion's gate, her feet suddenly slipped and almost fell. Fortunately, Yin Qi was quick-witted and helped her, and their contact caused the servants at the entrance of the palace to look at each other sideways. Anyone who encounters this situation will feel somewhat awkward. But Wanyue just blinked at Yin Qi. Yin Qi wanted to stay in the front yard to handle his official duties. Wanyue went west from the front yard, passed through the 2 gates of the Chuehua Gate, and continued north along the Shusho corridor. After passing by the garden of the Wang mansion, she entered the backyard. When she returned to the house, Yuji had already prepared her lunch. Wanyue sat down exhausted, while Yuji came over with a basin and half knelt to serve her wash her hands. After washing, she took a towel to dry the water stains on her hands, and then used hand cream from the dressing table to apply it to her. Wanyue twisted her body uncomfortable, and Yuji saw it. She raised her hand very gently and rubbed her back. Wanyue couldn't help but sigh. Yuji, this maid, is really clever. She just twisted her waist, and Yuji knew that she would need for her, which was still considerate. She couldn't help but look up and smile at Yuji, saying, "Yuji, thank you." Yuji was slightly taken aback and whispered, "Bien Fujin, stop saying that. This is what I should do." After finishing all of this, Wanyue stood up and sat at the rosewood table to have lunch. Wang Mama stood up beside her and smiled, saying, "I think Wu Bail is very kind to Mississippi Miss, you must seize the opportunity. Only when you have children with Wu Bail can you have hope for life." Wanyue smiled on her face, holding a plate of vegetables in her hand. She said she knew and understood, but she thought to herself that it would be better to talk about the issue of offspring in a while. Upon hearing Wanyue's answer, Grandma Wang nodded in satisfaction. After having lunch, Wanyue went to the garden to stroll around. Yuji followed her and unknowingly walked to the east wing room. Bai Jiasuxin's door was still tightly closed, and the window was also tightly closed. Is she confinement herself? Wanyue sighed. This is just my sister asking. She's probably about to become a Buddha. By the way, is my sister here to find a concubine? Zhang Gij, who was in the next room, greeted Wanyue immediately and warmly. Wanyue didn't know how to explain it. Did she tell Zhang Gij that she didn't listen and came here? She and Bai Jiasuxin were friends in a past life. With a hint of embarrassment on her face, Wanyue thought for a moment and turned to look at Zhang Gij. The bruises on her face were still clearly visible. Wanyue knowingly asked, "Get up quickly, sister. Is your injury better?" Zhang Gij's voice was slightly angry and said, "Thank you for your concern, sister. It's almost over." Zhang Gij invited her into the room again for a chat. Her maid Yudon saw Wanyue come in and immediately greeted her. Wanyue looked at her and raised her hand to signal her to get up. Yudon brought tea, and Wanyue took a few sips before handing it to Yuji. Zhang Gij gave Yudon a glance, and Yudon pulled Yuji back. After they left, Zhang Gij stood up, walked over to Wanyue and sat down, telling her what she wanted to do. Wanyue didn't speak after listening, just stared at the table in a daze. After a while, she sighed before speaking up, "Sister, Gargia is not something we can compete against now. Her family background and status are much better than yours and me. If you were to confront her now, it would be like hitting a stone with an egg. Listen to your sister's advice and endure as long as you can." Zhang Gij twisted her body in disbelief. Originally, she wanted to ask for Tara Wanyue's help, but she didn't want this side Fujin to be a soft persimmon. She could only frown and reply, "Then I'll listen to my sister." Upon hearing these words, Wanyue's face suddenly changed and she nodded in amazement. It is obvious that Zhang Gij wants to help her stand out, but he is not foolish enough to live a lifetime. It is better to avoid taking the blame for others. After leaving Zhang Gij's room, Wanyue half tilted her head and looked at the sky above her. A black cloud surged up in the sky, indicating that it was about to rain. It really started raining in the middle of the night, and Wanyue lay on the bed with a furrowed brow. With her current status as a Fujin, it is really inconvenient for her to enter and exit the royal palace, and how to go out and do business has become a problem. God, a business genius, has not yet gone to the mansion to reunite with his brother in the past few days. There is also Emperor Yongzheng from his past life, and the current 4 Bail Yin Zhen has recently visited the 5 Bail prefecture. To make money as soon as possible and hold on to the big tree of Yin Zhen, the only way is to take the initiative. Although Wanyue had met Yin Zhen in her past life, she almost always had occasions with imperial relatives and had few conversations. If she wanted to go out freely, perhaps only one person could make her wish come true. Lying on the bed, Wanyue thought of Yin Qi. Her autumn waves flowed, and a faint smile flashed in her eyes. Then she shouted to Yuji, who was guarding the door tonight, "Yuji, come in." Yuji stayed at the door, feeling a bit drowsy. Listening to the sound of Wufujin calling her, she stood up and looked. She pushed open the door and whispered, "Wufujin, you're looking for me." A faint smile appeared at the corner of Wanyue's lips. "Go to the study and see if Lord Bale has gone to bed. If Lord Bale has not gone to bed, ask the eunuch guarding the door to help convey it to Lord Bale, saying that I am so frightened by the sound of the rain that I cannot sleep." Yuji nodded and said, "Yes," quickly looking up at Side Fujin on the sleeping floor. Wanyue was wearing a diamond-shaped lotus root embroidered belly bag, with a piece of clothing close to her chest and abdomen, a tie around her neck, and 2 ropes at the left and right corners tied to her back. Side Fujin's body was accentuated by this belly bag, and she was afraid that Lord Bale would also take pity on her. Yuji withdrew her envious gaze and then took a step out. In the study of Bale Mansion, Yin Qi was making the final arrangements for the return of Emperor Ama. The Crown Prince entrusted this task to his 4th brother and him, and he dared not slack off. Until the sound outside the study suddenly reached the inside, Yin Qi's expression relaxed slightly. The butler at the door, Yen Qimin, almost immediately bent over and entered the study. Mr. Bale, the maid beside Fang Fujin, Yuji, came over to deliver a message, saying that Fang Fujin was so frightened by the rain that she couldn't sleep. After speaking, Yen Qimin instinctively glanced at Wu Bale with the corner of his eye, but saw the other person's smile on their face, which happened to meet him. Yen Qimin was stunned for a moment, realizing that he had lost his composure, and quickly withdrew his gaze. Yen Qimin immediately concluded that Wu Bale was absolutely extraordinary in his treatment of this Fujin Terra clan. Yin Qi put down the blue jade tube in his hand and picked up the purple hair brush. He pretended to cough lightly twice before saying, "Then go and take a look at Wufujin." The door of Wanyue's room was pushed open, leaving only 1 or 2 candles in the room. The candlelight shone on Wanyue's face, and Yin Qi looked from afar, appearing more and more enchanting and enchanting. After slowly approaching, the 2 of them blushed and glanced at each other. Yin Qi sat by the edge of the bed and placed his lips on Wanyue's lips. Wanyue then said softly and intermittently, "Lord Bale, I want to ask for grace. Staying in the mansion all day will make me feel suffocated. I want to go out for a walk every 3 to 5 days, okay?" Yin Qi listened to Wanyue's words, hummed, and happily lowered his head to put his mouth on Wanyue's mouth, kissing it with great force. Seeking collection, seeking monthly tickets, seeking comments, various requests. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. 4th Brother. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. 4th Brother. After a night of warmth, Wanyue finally had the opportunity to enter and exit Bale Mansion in the near future. On the 2nd day at 10:15, Wanyue didn't sleep in. When she opened her eyes, the sky was already slightly brighter, and Wu Bale was no longer in Wanyue's room, probably going to court. Yuji entered the door and served Wanyue to wash up, and after finishing it, Grandma Wang came in with breakfast and was about to go to Guerjia Inan's room to greet her. As soon as she arrived at the East Warm Pavilion, Wanyue met Lu Jiamayan at the door. Wanyue nodded at her and blessed her body. The maids at the door lifted the curtains, and Lu Jiamayan entered first, followed by Wanyue. Guerjia Inan sat on the golden silk nan seat, the dark shadow around her eyes couldn't even cover up. It turned out that Guerjia Inan didn't sleep last night. Grandma Gue told her last night that Bale had gone to the Terra family's room in the side of Fujin, which made her feel depressed. These days, Guerjiainan always tries every means to hook up with Wu Bail. Even once, she personally went to the study to find Bailyi, but Bailyi remained unmoved. Unexpectedly, last night, the Terra family summoned Bailyi to her room, which made her feel angry. At this moment, everyone came to her room to greet her, and the smile on her face slowly spread. After everyone saluted, they each sat in their respective seats. Wanyue sat below with her eyes lowered and remained silent, while Lu Jiamayan across from her also remained silent. They each picked up their tea cups and drank water. Zhang Gij saw this scene and couldn't help but smile slightly. Finally, this noble legitimate Fujin was exhausted. Everyone remained silent, but the beautiful Zhou Gij beside Lu Jiamayan spoke frankly with curious eyes and asked, "Di Fujin, I see that your eye circles seem a bit dark. Did you not rest well yesterday?" Guerjiainan was sitting upright on the golden silk throne drinking tea. Upon hearing this, his eyebrows immediately furrowed. Just as he was about to refute the speechless concubine, Lu Jia, who was next to him, took the lead. "Sister, Di Fujin is busy with all the affairs in the mansion all day long, and most of them are tired due to the complexity of various tasks. Unlike us who are idle all day long, as concubines, we should understand the difficulties of Di Fujin more." Wanyue lowered her head, only drinking tea in her mouth, but her heart was taken aback. Lu Jiamayan did indeed know how to speak good words, and she had praised herself in her past life, but these things are not important to her now. She just wants to say goodbye and end it early. Zhang Gij looked at Wanyue next to him calmly, so he restrained himself from speaking. Guerjiainan listened to the response of Lu Jia, a concubine from the side of Fujin, but did not answer. She just smiled and quickly glanced at the concubines below. It seems that only Lu Jia still values her among these concubines. She needs to quickly establish the authority of Di Fujin in the mansion, so that those concubines can know the rules. Silence, another wave of silence, was very boring, and finally Guerjiainan let everyone disperse. Wanyue stood up and retreated, without looking back, taking Wang Mama all the way from the East Warm Pavilion, bypassing the garden and the Shusho corridor, to the entrance of the Bale mansion. The carriage driver from the mansion greeted her and said that the carriage was ready. Wanyue nodded and got on the carriage with the help of Wang Mama. Along the way, Wanyue lifted the carriage curtain and looked at the lively street outside. The people were bustling and the shops were numerous, making her happy. The residence of Sibylingen is located at the northeast corner of Dongzaimen, after the carriage stopped. Wanyue got off the carriage with a smile on her face, and Wang Mama's expression was slightly stunned. She had never heard of Miss coming to look for the women in Sibyl Mansion. Wanyue got off the carriage, but stayed by the carriage without moving. Wang Mama looked at her with a complicated mood and didn't understand why the young lady came to Sibyl Mansion. "Wait, wait, wait, wait," a string of hooves suddenly reached Wanyue's ear. The man waiting to ride got off the horse, and it was only then that Wanyue could see his attire clearly. The man was dressed in a stone blue court robe, with coral beads hanging from his neck and a golden jade square-facing belt tied around his waist. 2 East pearls were embedded in the belt, and he had a pair of soap boots under his feet. His thin cheeks and cold eyebrows and eyes were cold. "Who is the 4th elder brother?" Wanyue's heart skipped a beat. How could the emperor, who had killed his brothers in his past life, resolve his dislike for Jiudi and change the fate of Jiudi's family? Seeing that Sibyl was about to walk towards the mansion, Wanyue quickly stepped forward and raised her head to shout, "4th brother," at Sibyl. Su Peisheng, the close servant of Si Bale, paused for a moment. He had never seen this woman before and sternly scolded, "Dare, where did you come from? Did Si Bale just call out like that?" Si Bale Yin Zhen was quite strict in his personality. When he heard someone call him 4th brother, he turned his head to look around. The woman was dressed in a pink brocade gilded robe, with an orange silk floral design on her shoulder. The main silk flower on the flag was ice blue, and the 2 side flowers were white. The tassels were pink-blue, with only a butterfly hairpin slanted on her head. Judging from his attire, it should be from which family Fujin came from, but he had never seen him before. With a hint of doubt in his eyes, he frowned and asked, "Which family are you from? Why do you call me fourth brother?" It was only then that Wanyue remembered that Yin Zhen had not met her in this lifetime, and it was only natural that she did not know who she was. She quickly explained, "Fourth brother, I am the Terra family from the side of Wubble Mansion. I came to visit today, but it was a bit abrupt not to inform you in advance." Seeing that it was Fang Fujin from the fifth brother's mansion and looking at the carriage driver not far away, Yin Zhen turned to his close eunuch Su Peixing and said, "Since she belongs to the fifth brother's family, you can take her to the legitimate Fujin's room." After finishing speaking, Sibyl Yin Zhen took a few steps and suddenly turned around to stare at Wanyue, saying, "If you come to the mansion in the future to talk to the female relatives, just say a word to the gatekeeper." Wanyue didn't dare to be reckless either. She knew it wasn't time for her to speak up yet, so she had to hold back. At this moment, she was truly carefree. Now, on the surface, Wanyue is called Sibyl Yin Zhen by the name of fourth brother. Although she intends to establish a good relationship with the future Emperor Yongzheng, it seems that he does not even offer her the method of being courteous. As she left the entrance of Sibyl Mansion, Wanyue looked disappointed. Wang Mama asked curiously, "Miss, why did you come to Sibyl Mansion?" Wanyue shook her head and remained silent, but Wang Mama suddenly understood something when she thought about it. As soon as Wanyue returned to her room, Yuji walked up with a smile and asked, "Side Fujin, did you go out today?" Wanyue nodded with a smile, her gaze lightly turned, and she saw a figure hidden behind the ginkgo tree in the yard. Wanyue frowned and didn't speak. Wang Mama followed her gaze and chose to turn a blind eye to the figure. She only smiled and said to Wang Mama, "Mama, we seem to be very well received in this mansion." This person goes without saying, Wanyue can also guess who it is. At the moment of speaking, a plan flashed rapidly through her mind. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Birthday. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Birthday. Time passed by little, and now what was in front of Wanyue was that her birthday would be in a few days. Since meeting Sibyl at the Sibyl Mansion that day, I have hardly seen her again in the past 20 days. This is Wanyue's first birthday after her rebirth, and she has decided that the birthday banquet must be grand and dignified. In the blink of an eye, it was the day of Wanyue's birthday. She chose a bright red and gold trimmed jacket to wear, making herself look happier. The servants of the West Warm Pavilion were also happy. The master's birthday meant that they could also receive some rewards, so they got up early to prepare, fearing that they would neglect the birthday banquet of Bien Fujin. Outside the pavilion in the garden, Di Fujin Gua Er Jia E Nan and Bien Fujin Lu Jia Miao Yin walked in front of each other, as if they had agreed. The two of them arrived at Wanyue's room and heard a burst of laughter entering the spring breeze, their faces instantly turning ugly. But soon the displeasure dissipated, leaving behind two smiling faces. Yuji at the door lifted the curtain and welcomed them in, with several other maids from the concubines following behind. "Sister, today is your wedding day. Di Fujin and I have come over to congratulate you." Lu Jiamayan walked into Wanyue's room with great strides. She lowered her eyes and scanned the decorations in the room, and a crisp voice began to sound. "Yeah, it's rare to encounter happy events in the mansion," Guerjiainan said coldly. Upon hearing the sound, Wanyue lifted her body and took 2 steps forward to greet them, smiling as she replied, "The two sisters were joking, and I was just celebrating my birthday." After speaking, Wanyue smiled and asked them to sit down. Wang Mama beside her poured tea for them, and the maids holding congratulatory gifts placed them on the rosewood table. Wanyue took 2 sips of tea lightly, but finally couldn't sit still. She was overjoyed and wanted to open the gift box and take a look as if she couldn't hold her breath. Just as she opened the gift given to her by Guerjiainan, she was shocked to find that the high-quality Yunjin silk was cut into several pieces with scissors. Guerjiainan's face was also stunned when she saw the broken cloud brocade satin. She looked at everyone in surprise, and the people in the room held their breath and were too focused to speak. Lu Jiamayan coughed lightly twice and said, "How could this Yunjin be like this? It must have been accidentally damaged by some servant." Wanyue's face was frozen and she hardly spoke. This gift box was carried by a maid in Guerjiainan's room throughout the entire process, never by anyone else. Now that it is like this, naturally the maid is the most suspicious. Guerjiainan turned around and walked quickly towards the maid. "You lowly servant, to be honest, when did you break the gift that Ben Fujin was preparing to give to Fang Fujin?" Before he could finish speaking, he slapped the maid and she covered her face. She knelt down with a loud moan, trembling slightly. Finally, tears poured out uncontrollably, and a dull, chirping cry came from her chest. "Bien Fujin, please forgive me. I don't know why this congratulatory gift turned out like this." Wanyue was taken aback. At this moment, Guerjiainan was standing quietly on the side watching her. Wanyue's face changed slightly and she said gently, "How can you be blamed for this? Get up quickly, it's a pity that this top-quality brocade has wasted my sister's kindness to me." The noise in the room grew louder and louder, and the maid cried mournfully. Guerjiainan couldn't hold her face and didn't know which damn servant had done the trick. Wanyue looked at the maid and her heart became tighter and tighter, comforting her by saying, "Don't cry." At this moment, I heard the servants at the door shouting, "Mr. Baylor is here." Before Wanyue could finish speaking, she saw the curtain of the door being lifted up, and saw San Bail, Si Bail, Yin Qi, and Jiu Di rushing in. Yin Qi was walking at the front, and he looked at Wanyue with a smile on his lips. At this moment, Guerjiainan in the room quickly stepped forward to block the servant girl who was still sobbing softly, and turned her head to glare at her. The servant girl quickly fell silent. Wang Mama, who was standing next to the rosewood table, secretly hid the shattered cloud brocade satin under the chair behind her. Subsequently, the crowd bent down to salute. Yin Qi smiled and helped up Wanyue, saying, "Everyone, get up. I didn't expect your room to be so lively." Wanyue smiled slightly, and Guerjiainan watched the scene. She felt a moment of panic and then calmed down. "Lord Bail, I have something else to do in my room, so I'll go back first." After obtaining the permission of Lord Baylor, she stood up again and bowed and withdrew from San Baylor, Si Baylor, and Jiu Gu who were moving forward. Lu Jiamayan had a serene look in her eyes, and she led the maids to retreat with wit. "Today happens to be your birthday, and it's almost time for lunch after we've finished discussing business, so we brought them over to celebrate your birthday. Are you fully prepared for lunch here?" Yin Qi smiled and looked at Wanyue, pulling her in and asked softly. "Enough, Yuji, hurry up and inform the kitchen to prepare more dishes. Just say that San Bei Lu, Si Bei Lu, and Jiu Gu have all come." After San Bail, Si Bail, Yin Qi, and Jiu Age all sat down, the remaining Wang Mama in the room quickly brought a basin of water to serve several ages washing their hands. Wanyue secretly glanced at several elder brothers. San Bail's expression was unchanged, while Si Bail's expression remained expressionless. There seemed to be no content in his pitch-black eyes, and Jiu Di looked at Yin Qi with a smile on his lips. After lunch, Wanyue pondered over what to say to catch the attention of Jiu Di and Si Bail. Suddenly, her heart lit up and she patted her thighs, muttering happily, "Got it." She thought of General Fei Yanggu in her past life and immediately became energetic. While San Bail was taking Yin Qi out to chat about gossip, she said, "Fourth brother and ninth brother, I heard from the fortune teller that General Fei Yanggu will report to Emperor Ama that Galdan died of poisoning in the next few days. His daughter Zhong Qihai led 300 households to surrender. Emperor Ama personally led the officials to worship the heavens and ordered all the armies to return to court. And tomorrow, it will rain heavily." Si Bail and Jiu Age both looked at her in surprise, completely unable to imagine what a fortune teller could believe. Wu Bail sighed. Wufujin was probably having a problem with his mind. Wanyue smiled, knowing that they probably wouldn't believe it, but it was all a fact from a past life. Wanyue smiled apologetically, not noticing any nervousness, but in fact, she had already quietly sweated from her back. The anxious mood persisted until the birthday banquet was over, and it was certain that no one would walk around the room again. Only then did Wanyue feel relieved. She stood in front of the window, looking up at the sky and contemplating the situation today. She felt a little excited and couldn't help but see the surging waves that were about to rise, crashing down like mountains and seas. She seemed to see the flames about to burn, raging and destroying the gloomy past. And she is the one who drives this great storm and flames. After sleeping alone, Wanyue pondered over this matter again. That night, Wanyue slept exceptionally soundly. When she woke up in the morning, it was just early morning and she had just woken up. On the second day, it was indeed reported that Galdan Run had died from poisoning on the 13th of the third month. Upon hearing the news in his residence, Jiu Age immediately froze, and Si Bail outside the palace also frowned upon hearing the news. End of this chapter.